A child born into a wealthy family wakes up in a mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. His parents, sipping coffee on a sun-drenched balcony, aren't worried about paying bills, affording college, or retiring comfortably. By the time he turns 18, he already understands how money works, how to invest, how to leverage assets, how to turn every dollar into two. He's been taught the rules of the game from the very beginning. A child born into a working-class family wakes up in a small apartment. His parents leave before sunrise, exhausted from double shifts, stretching every paycheck to make ends meet. They teach him the same lessons they learned: work hard, save what you can, and hope for the best. But hope isn't a financial strategy, and hard work alone doesn't create generational wealth. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not in your favor. While most people are stuck in a cycle of earning and spending, the rich play an entirely different game, one built on ownership, leverage, and strategies that keep them ahead, while everyone else struggles to catch up. At the age of 12, a boy named Lucas sat at the dinner table with his father, watching him scan a portfolio of stocks, real estate holdings, and business reports. His father explained how money wasn't something to be earned and spent, it was something to be multiplied. The shares in his portfolio had grown in value without him lifting a finger. The apartment buildings he owned sent him monthly checks from tenants who lived in them. His investments weren't just numbers on a screen. They were soldiers, working tirelessly day and night to make him wealthier. Lucas learned that wealth wasn't built in a paycheck. It was built in ownership. On the other side of town, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, helping his mother sort through a pile of overdue bills. The electricity company had sent another warning notice. His mother sighed, pulling out a calculator to see if her paycheck would cover rent after the groceries. She had worked hard her entire life, putting in overtime whenever possible, but no matter how many hours she worked, her income never seemed to stretch far enough. No one had ever taught her how to invest. The only financial advice she had ever received was to get a stable job, save what little she could, and avoid debt. Lucas would inherit not just his father's wealth, but his father's knowledge. The trust fund waiting for him on his 25th birthday had already been compounding interest for years. He would inherit stock portfolios filled with companies his family had owned for decades, properties with tenants already paying rent, and a network of wealthy friends and business partners willing to invest in any venture he chose to pursue. Marcus, on the other hand, would inherit something else: his mother's financial struggles. When he turned 18, there would be no investments waiting for him, no assets producing income. Instead, he would inherit the expectation to work, to grind, to chase security in a system that was never designed to make him wealthy. Taxes ensured the cycle continued. When Marcus got his first job, a third of his paycheck would vanish before it ever reached his hands. He would pay income tax, Social Security, and Medicare, the system pulling from every dollar he earned. But Lucas's wealth would grow differently. His investments, whether in stocks, real estate, or private businesses, would be taxed at a much lower rate. Instead of paying income tax on every dollar he made, his money would be taxed as capital gains, sometimes as low as 15%. His father's accountants would use tax shelters, deductions, and legal loopholes to ensure the family kept as much of their fortune as possible. Marcus would never be offered these strategies because they were never meant for him. By the time Lucas graduated college, he'd already taken investment courses, learned about tax optimization, and understood the power of leverage. He had been taught the real rules of money, not just how to earn it, but how to make it work for him. Marcus, on the other hand, would leave school with student loans, struggling to afford the rising cost of living, following the same outdated advice. Work hard, save money, and hope things get better. But things wouldn't get better, because without financial education, without assets, without access to the same tools the wealthy used, Marcus would always be running a race he was never meant to win. At 28 years old, Lucas sat in a sleek high-rise office reviewing a new real estate investment deal. The numbers were clear. A small apartment complex in a growing city, purchased with a mix of his own capital and a low-interest loan. Within months, the tenants' rent checks would start flowing in, covering the mortgage and putting extra cash in his pocket. Every dollar he had invested wasn't just sitting in a bank, it was working for him, generating income, growing in value. Meanwhile, Marcus, the same age, walked into a car dealership, signing off on a new luxury sedan. The salesman congratulated him, handing him the keys as he drove off the lot, feeling the thrill of success. But what he didn't realize was that the car, unlike Lucas's apartment complex, wasn't an asset, it was a liability. Every month, he would send hundreds of dollars in payments to the bank. Every year, the car would lose value, depreciating by the thousands. The thrill would fade, but the debt would remain. Wealth wasn't just about how much money someone had, it was about where they put it. Lucas's money went into assets, properties that paid him rent, stocks that grew in value, businesses that generated profits. Marcus's money went into liabilities, car payments, expensive clothes, and the latest gadgets. Things that took money out of his pocket instead of putting money in. The difference between the two wasn't income, it was financial decision-making. Debt played an even bigger role in separating the two. Lucas had millions of dollars in debt, but not in the way most people feared it. His debt wasn't from credit cards or personal loans, it was from investments. He borrowed money at low interest rates to buy assets that made him richer. His apartment complex, funded by a mortgage, his stocks, bought using a strategy called margin investing. His business started with capital from investors who trusted him because of his track record. His debt worked for him, expanding his wealth, multiplying his cash flow. Marcus, on the other hand, had debt that worked against him. His car loan came with high interest. His credit card balance, racked up from years of spending, barely moved despite monthly payments. His personal loan, taken out to cover unexpected expenses, drained his paycheck before he even had the chance to save. While Lucas's debt built his fortune, Marcus's debt kept him locked in a cycle of repayment, always a step behind. The biggest difference between them wasn't just how they used money, it was how they viewed it. Marcus saw his salary as his lifeline. Every dollar he made was spent covering his expenses, leaving him reliant on the next paycheck and the one after that. If he stopped working, the money stopped flowing. Lucas, however, saw cash flow differently. His income didn't depend on his time, it depended on his assets. His businesses, his real estate, his investments, they generated money whether he worked or not. While Marcus traded time for money, Lucas built a system where money worked for him. Two men, two different approaches to money. One built a life of financial freedom, where wealth compounded, where cash flowed effortlessly. The other remained trapped, working harder, earning more, yet never truly getting ahead. The gap between them wasn't talent or intelligence, it was simply the difference between knowing the rules of money and never being taught them. Lucas sat in a private conference room, sipping espresso as he listened to a presentation from a promising tech startup. The company was seeking early investors, offering equity in exchange for capital. Lucas wasn't there by accident, he had been invited. His network, built over years of attending elite gatherings and closed-door meetings, had opened the door to yet another wealth-building opportunity. If the startup succeeded, his initial investment would multiply tenfold, just as it had with his past ventures. It wasn't luck, it was access. Meanwhile, Marcus scrolled through his phone, frustrated by yet another viral ad promising overnight riches. A new crypto coin, a day trading system, a course claiming to unlock financial freedom in 30 days, it was always the same. The promise of quick wealth, the lure of fast money. He had tried before, putting what little savings he had into trends that disappeared as fast as they emerged. The losses hurt, but the real damage was deeper. Years spent chasing shortcuts instead of learning how real wealth was built. For Lucas, there was no rush. His money grew over time, compounding through long-term investments. The stocks in his portfolio weren't about making quick profits. They were chosen for steady, reliable growth. The real estate he owned wasn't flipped for fast cash. It was held for years, appreciating in value while producing rental income. He understood that wealth wasn't built overnight. It was built over decades. Marcus, on the other hand, had never been taught patience when it came to money. Every extra dollar felt temporary, like it had to be used immediately. If a raise came at work, his lifestyle inflated to match. If a sudden windfall appeared, it was spent before it had a chance to grow. Investing for the long haul felt impossible when every month was a financial struggle. His mindset had been shaped by a system that taught survival, not strategy. But the greatest wealth-building tool the rich possessed wasn't just money. It was relationships. Lucas's phone was filled with contacts, investors, CEOs, real estate moguls. His business ventures didn't require him to build everything from scratch. He partnered with those who already had the knowledge, the experience, the capital. Opportunities didn't come from blind luck, they came from knowing the right people. Marcus had a network too, but it was different. His circle consisted of co-workers, friends and family, all good people, but none with access to the kind of financial knowledge that could change his situation. When financial advice was given, it was always the same: save what you can, work hard, hope for a promotion. No one in his world talked about ownership, equity or leverage because no one had ever been exposed to it. Ownership was the final and most crucial divide. Lucas never relied on a paycheck because he didn't trade time for money. He owned businesses, stocks and real estate, things that paid him regardless of how many hours he worked. If a company he invested in thrived, he didn't just earn a salary. He owned a piece of its success. His wealth grew through ownership, not labor. Marcus had spent years working hard, yet every dollar he earned depended on the hours he put in. He had no ownership stake in the company he worked for, just a salary that barely kept pace with inflation. If he stopped working, the money stopped too. He wasn't building wealth, he was simply surviving. Two men, two different financial realities. One controlled his financial destiny, creating wealth that would outlive him. The other remained trapped in a cycle of earning and spending, never knowing that the game he was playing was designed to keep him from winning. Marcus stared at the small amount of money left in his bank account, feeling the familiar wave of anxiety. Every time he thought about investing, a voice in his head told him it was too risky. What if he lost it all? What if the market crashed? What if he needed that money for an emergency? He had worked too hard to take a chance on something uncertain. The thought of putting his savings into stocks or real estate made him uneasy, so he did what felt safest. He kept his money where he could see it, sitting in a low-interest savings account, slowly losing value to inflation. Lucas had a different approach. When he was younger, he had learned that money wasn't meant to be hoarded, it was meant to grow. He knew that avoiding risk was the greatest risk of all. When he made his first investment, he wasn't scared of losing. He was scared of missing out on what his money could become. Over the years, he saw his wealth multiply, not because he was lucky, but because he understood that growth required taking calculated risks. While Marcus clung to security, Lucas embraced opportunity. But security wasn't just about avoiding risk, it was also about instant gratification. Marcus had spent his whole life being told that money was meant to be spent. A bigger paycheck meant upgrading his lifestyle, a newer car, nicer clothes, weekend trips. The idea of waiting years for money to grow felt impossible when there were so many things he wanted now. His friends lived the same way, celebrating every small financial win with new purchases, rewarding themselves for hard work. Waiting felt like missing out. Lucas saw things differently. Every dollar spent today was a dollar that couldn't grow tomorrow. When he made money, his first thought wasn't about what he could buy. It was about how he could multiply it. While Marcus upgraded his car, Lucas upgraded his investments. While Marcus treated himself to expensive nights out, Lucas reinvested his profits. He had learned early on that wealth wasn't about how much you made. It was about how much you kept and grew. Education played another critical role in their paths. Marcus had never been taught how money truly worked. Schools had drilled algebra and history into his head, but had never explained credit, investments, or the difference between assets and liabilities. His parents had done their best, but they had been taught the same outdated lessons: work hard, save what you can, and hope for the best. Without financial education, he was left to figure things out on his own, often learning the hard way. Lucas, however, had been given the blueprint from the start. His education went beyond textbooks. His parents had shown him how to analyze investments, how to negotiate deals, how to legally reduce taxes. When he had questions, he had mentors who had already built wealth, guiding him through the process. While Marcus struggled to navigate finances blindly, Lucas had been given a map. But the biggest divide wasn't just knowledge or habits, it was mindset. Marcus had spent his life chasing comfort, a steady paycheck, a predictable routine, the illusion of stability. He had been taught to aim for good enough because anything beyond that felt risky, even unattainable. He didn't dream of owning businesses or building wealth because deep down he didn't believe it was possible. Lucas had never aimed for comfort. He had aimed for growth. He understood that wealth didn't come from playing it safe, from staying within familiar limits. Growth meant stepping into discomfort, taking risks, failing and learning. He wasn't content with security. He wanted freedom. And while Marcus stayed trapped in the cycle of earning and spending, Lucas broke free, not because he was smarter or luckier, but because he saw money and life through an entirely different lens. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, staring at his latest paycheck. He had worked extra hours, taken on more responsibilities, yet somehow it still felt like he was running in place. The bills were paid, but there was little left over. The cycle continued: earn, spend, repeat. Something had to change. He pulled out his phone and searched for books on investing, business and money management. He knew he couldn't rely on what he had been taught growing up. If the wealthy had been playing a different game all along, it was time to learn the rules. The first step was education. Every day before bed, Marcus read about how money worked. He learned how taxes weren't just something to be paid, they were something to be optimized. He discovered how the wealthy used businesses to shelter income, how real estate investors built fortunes with other people's money, how long-term investing turned small amounts into millions over time. He took online courses on financial literacy, absorbing knowledge that had never been part of his upbringing. The more he learned, the more he realized that financial freedom wasn't just for the elite. It was for those willing to understand how the system worked. But knowledge alone wouldn't change his situation. The next step was action. Marcus started with one simple goal: build another stream of income. His salary was fixed, but his potential wasn't. He brainstormed ways to make money outside of his job. He started a small online business, selling products he researched in his spare time. It didn't make him rich overnight, but it was a start. He set aside a portion of his earnings to invest, first in index funds, then in dividend-paying stocks. The goal wasn't to get rich fast, it was to plant seeds that would grow over time. Debt had always been an anchor, keeping him from moving forward. The interest on his credit cards, car loan and personal loans drained his income each month. He tackled it aggressively, starting with the highest interest balances first. He stopped using credit for unnecessary purchases and redirected every extra dollar toward eliminating his financial burdens. But he also learned that not all debt was bad. Once his consumer debt was under control, he studied how the wealthy used leverage, not for buying liabilities, but for acquiring assets. He realized that money borrowed to invest in cash-flowing properties or businesses was different from money borrowed to fund lifestyle upgrades. Everything started to shift when he changed his mindset. Marcus no longer viewed wealth as something unattainable, reserved for those born into privilege. He saw it as a skill, one that could be learned, practiced, and mastered. He began surrounding himself with successful people, watching how they thought, how they made decisions. He cut out negative influences, friends who only talked about what they couldn't afford, co-workers who laughed at the idea of financial independence. Instead of complaining about money, he started strategizing how to make more of it. But none of it mattered without consistency. Small daily actions became the foundation of his transformation. Each paycheck he invested a portion before spending. Each week he refined his side hustle, testing ways to grow it. Each month he reviewed his financial progress, adjusting his strategy where needed. There were setbacks, mistakes in investing, business ideas that didn't work, but he didn't stop. He understood that wealth wasn't built in a single moment. It was the result of years of intentional choices. What started as frustration turned into progress. What had once seemed impossible became normal. Marcus wasn't just working for money anymore. His money was starting to work for him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something, and that made all the difference. Lucas stepped out onto the balcony of his penthouse, looking down at the city below. His wealth wasn't the result of a single stroke of luck or one big payday. It was the product of years of understanding how money worked, how to make it grow, how to multiply it. He had never been trapped in the cycle of working for a paycheck because he had been taught early on that wealth wasn't about how much you earned, it was about what you owned. Assets, cash flow, leverage, these were the tools the wealthy used to ensure their money worked for them, even while they slept. Marcus, now years into his financial journey, wasn't standing on a penthouse balcony yet, but he was no longer drowning in debt, no longer living paycheck to paycheck, no longer a prisoner to financial stress. The steps he had taken, the books he read, the investments he made, the mindset shifts he embraced had started to pay off. His money no longer disappeared the moment it hit his account. It worked for him, growing in the background, compounding over time. He had built multiple income streams, freed himself from bad debt, and most importantly, changed the way he saw wealth. The difference between the rich and the struggling isn't just money, it's how money is used. The wealthy don't just earn, they invest. They don't just work, they own. They don't fear money, they make it work for them. The game has always been the same, but most people never realize they've been playing by the wrong rules. But it's never too late to learn. The information is out there. The strategies are available. The choice is simple. Stay trapped in the same cycle, following the same outdated financial advice, or take the first step toward a different future. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy. But wealth isn't built in a day. It's built through discipline, knowledge, and action. For those ready to break free, the journey starts now. The world of money isn't reserved for the elite. It's open to anyone willing to learn, apply, and take control of their financial future. The only question is, who will take that first